everybody. Welcome back to another great episode of the Red, White, and You Show with yours truly, the military medium. Today, I have with us Jake Clark. Now, this guy served in a lot of different capacities, and we're going to get to why he's on the show today. But Jake served as enlisted and an officer within the Army, in the Army National Guard. He served some time with the LAPD and Secret Service. But currently, he is the founder and president of Save a Warrior, or S.A.W. Foundation. Jake, welcome to the Red, White, and You Show.
Thank you, Dean. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing. I know you're a busy guy. So tell us a little bit about your background, Jake. I know we were talking prior to the show, but, who is Jake Clark?
That's something I've been trying to figure out for the better part of 54 years I've been alive. I'm just someone who, like a lot of people that end up in these roles in life, whether it's military or first responder. I came from a small town in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, from what could be characterized as a very dysfunctional upbringing. Kind of set out in life trying to make my own way, and had a lot of great successes early in my life, and in my early 30s ended up crashing my life, and then tried to spent the next 20 years trying to figure that out. And along the way, I discovered some things about myself and about the other people who I'd also encountered along the way. And during that time, a lot of events came to pass in contemporary history that started to shine a light on some of the issues that people like myself end up facing, these existential crises in life. And, I've discovered, there's really two kinds of people in life, those that want to know and those that don't want to know. And at some point, it was clear to me that I wanted to know, but it really didn't make any sense what was going on with me until it really started bothering me that people coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan were killing themselves. A lot of things in life didn't make any sense to me, and I could tend to figure them out. I am a fairly educated guy, and I'm grateful for that education. But I just, for the life of me, could not understand how somebody could serve 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tours of duty. I've seen folks here at S.A.W. that have served as many as 13 rotations in some specialized units, that after surviving all that, they would come home and kill themselves. I couldn't put the logic of that together. So I was determined to find out what were the causes and conditions that led somebody to ultimately be in so much pain and suffering that they decided one day, that's it, I'm going to end my life, that it's not worth going on. And we figured that out to a scientific certainty, which I don't think a lot of people in this space would come on your show and say.
Right.
But that's the reason why the issue is pervasive as it is that people are trying to help people like me, but they don't understand really what the problem is.
Right. And so for you, was that the burning wick, if you will, that lit or ignited the passion, if you will, of the birth of S.A.W? Was that, Save a Warrior Foundation? Was that the, in a sense, if you think of the fuse that ignited this where you are today?
I would say the initial fuse was this part of my personality that was so desperate for approval and significance that it was one more part of a life lived in denial, that the stars ultimately aligned to a place where I had enough encounters with really good people that were coming to me for help, that at some point there was some kind of shift at the level of personality where I thought, you know what, at what point do you want your life to be who you really are? And maybe in figuring that out, you're going to be able to help some of these people who not only desperately need help, but they're deserving of help. And until I could figure out what was really going on for me internally, I was going to be very limited in my ability to walk people through something. And when I say walk people through something, you're talking about some exceptional warriors that have put themselves in this organization's, you know, um, what's the word I'm looking for, Dean? They're coming to us saying, I don't have anywhere else to turn. And whether it was, a dev GRU operator or a Green Beret or a member of the LAPD SWAT team, I'm talking warriors who had operated at the apex of um, accomplishment in their respective fields that did not understand why they could no longer manage their day-to-day living. People who were first in the door, first in the fight, people that warriors looked up to. And when you're dealing with someone like that, you absolutely have to be in a place to deal with them honestly and openly, because the facts don't lie and the numbers don't lie. And I'm not trying to, I hope what I'm saying is not confusing. I had to figure out where I was completely full of shit in my own life before I could help
Mhm.
somebody else kind of figure out what was going on in their life. So it's been a journey inside of a journey inside of a journey. But that, when we started this 8 years ago, I didn't imagine discovering what we would ultimately discover along the way. And I think it goes to the reason why there is always such a long waiting list for our services,
Right.
because of the reputation in the space that, look, if you are at the end of your rope and you really want to know what's going on for you, because when the news is broken to you in this conversation about what the issue is, it's devastating to someone who's already in the midst of an existential crisis.
Right.
Does
Why
that
do you,
make sense?
it does. It does, absolutely, because it almost, what you're saying, it almost pierces the glass ceiling, so to speak, the facade that it's either self-created or the one that we've adopted, because either it's familiar or something that we can, whether we can or can't, wrap our heads around, right? Um, but I wanted to ask you, Jake. So here you're talking about tier one folks, whether, on the civilian aspect or government, doesn't matter what they're doing. These, the folks you're talking about, tier one top operators and everything they do. Um, you know, when I think of that, I guess the past military experience, we think about the equipment, right? And here the government, the local organizations, they devote just the what you would think the latest and greatest tools and techniques to these individuals to help them do what they need to do. Why do you feel that, you know that folks here, here they get the best weapon systems or the best whatever training, but when they return, like, that's where it's lacking, right? So, in dealing with this trauma, why do you feel that they continually get served up short, in a sense? have you Does that make sense?
The reason they get served up short is the part of the system that is touching that operator upon the return. First of all, there's not they're not connecting with someone who has survived their own dark night of the soul. So when all the rage now are these peer-to-peer support groups. And here's how a peer-to-peer would work. Dean, tell me what's going on with you to the point that it threatens my own station in society. Don't don't tell me everything. Tell me enough to where I can turf you to another resource. The lack there for someone is there's not an opportunity to connect at a really vulnerable level with another human being who has gone through and who has transcended and who has come out the other side of their own
Mm,
dark night of the soul in this existential crisis.
yeah.
This is why the 12-step programs are so effective. Challenges in this community is people are not aware of these community resiliency experiences because there's not a listening for them in this culture. This is a culture that thrives on um, significance and symbolism. You know, we wear a lot of our achievements on the outside. There's a high degree of comparison, and you're looking at a system that places a high degree of emphasis on seeking material solutions for spiritual problems.
Mm,
You can only solve spiritual problems with spiritual solutions. The great news is we live in a time where the problem is so bad, someone like me 20 or 30 years ago, I'd have been laughed out of the room. And I tried to do something like this a few decades ago, but I think it was a little bit before its time. Whereas today, when people come through the SAW experience, the common refrain is, this is exactly what I needed in
mm,
4.5 days. This, I don't know how you guys figured it out or cracked this code, but this was the experience that I needed to clearly see my life, because by the time they've gotten to us, they've
mhm,
been through the VA, they've been to the National Intrepid Center of Excellence, they've been to the private healthcare professional, you know, they've been down to Costa Rica doing ayahuasca, they've taken psychedelics, they've taken psychotropics, they've done the talk therapy, whether it's cognitive behavioral, whether it's prolonged exposure, and it's always left them wanting. Why? Because they're not going to get down to the developmental trauma and process the unmourned grief that's stuck underneath all of it, that
mm,
props up all the denial, which leads to more dissociation,
mm,
which leads to another shot of shame. We call it running the rails. So people that come to us are running the rails, they're stuck and they're drifting, and they're in a spiral that is absolutely leading to a continuing self-destructive life, ultimately culminating with suicide.
sure. You brought up a term, and I know what it means, but um, could you elaborate a little bit on dark night of the soul? And a lot of people don't realize what that is. They may have heard of that term, but a lot of people truly don't get it, and maybe until you go through it yourself. But could you elaborate a little bit on that term?
The dark night of the soul is a triggering event in someone's life that they really don't see coming. The end of a relationship, the loss of a career position, the death of a child, the life showing up on life's terms seemingly out of nowhere, that causes one to come face to face with who they are at the most granular level of existence, where there is no wiggle room left, where one is absolutely at this critical juncture of ultimately considering whether they're going to choose an authentic life, live from their heart, or they're going to continue living life pretending that they're not pretending, which ultimately is very, very exhausting. That's my definition of a dark night of the soul. The universe is trying to send you another wake up call, only this one came through 5 by 5.
Right. Well, and it's something that grabs you by the short hairs, right? And
Yeah.
basically shakes you around, and it's a come to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
But however you want to put it, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
something
Yeah.
you
And
can't.
for a lot of, and sometimes it's a cumulative effect. It's
Right.
just, you wake up one day and it's the way every great film starts. The protagonist, the hero, the main character wakes up, and today is going to be that day where all the bills are going to come due in their life,
Right.
and what am I going to do with this, as I go on this hero or this heroine's journey? It's archetypal, It's metaphysical, it's mythological, and it's the
Mm,
oldest story known to man.
right.
It's the total Joseph Campbell hero's journey, and that is what we create in an alternate, in a kind of a, it's not a virtual reality, it's an augmented reality. We
Yeah.
create reality for that to show up here at Saw for people. So when they come to us, Dean, it doesn't matter what's coming out of your mouth. If you're sitting in that seat, we already know what the problem is. You don't know that we know. And even if you did believe us, you don't really believe us. But we're going to create that critical moment for you to really have that breakthrough experience that's necessary for you to move forward in your life.
So you said something back when we started. You you said something about that you guys have cracked the code. You figured out on a scientific level the aspect. Can you share a little bit more about that? And obviously you can't. I mean, it's not something that where all of a sudden you're gonna reveal the secret sauce because there's too many nuances, and in our little thing here, it's not like everybody's gonna figure it out. So, but um, if you could share with us a little bit the process, and then kind of if somebody came to saw like, and I know that it might be specific maybe to the individual, but what the process is.
Yeah, there's only one problem ever uh, in the beingness of human being. And this is after taking more than 1,100 people through this program. This is after spending 23 years in recovery. There's only ever one problem. And the way we determine to a scientific certainty the depth of that problem is from a study that occurred 25 years ago, which is now all the rage in the psycho-spiritual, psychological realm, is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. And it takes about 20 years for an innovation gap to close. And about 5 years ago, people started looking at ACEs scores from 0 to 10. And what we know is that 80% of the people that come to SAW are a 4 and above, which is catastrophic in terms of what that does neurophysiologically and the way that presents in a person's you know behavior over the arc of their lifetime. You can almost predict certain crises at certain junctures in a person's life. For example, once a person reaches a 6 on a 10 scale, they're 5,000% more likely to attempt suicide at some point in their life, which explains why more than half the people who end up coming to Saul have already previously attempted to take their own life. And the more one is inclined towards suicidality, the one more has attempted to move those thresholds, the more likely they are to attempt again. So we can understand with science how we need to shape the conversation we're going to have with you. And again, it took 20 years for that. That study was done by Kaiser in 1995, but it didn't really come to light until 2015. So we can tell from that and from some very preliminary inquiry what's going on for you internally. So
Mm,
much of this that people struggle with is artifact of their developmental trauma for what happened for them with their family of origin, that's buried down deep, deep, deep. And that's developmental trauma. You put moral injury of war and life on top of the streets, life on the streets on top of that, now you've got complex PTS, which is nothing more than a collapse of development plus moral injury. Then you add comorbidity with addiction, whether it's chemical or process. Now, I don't know what the language codes are on your show, but we have a term of art that we like to use that you may have to be out, but it goes, you're fucked, you fucked, par fucked with a six pack of fuck. When you have these kinds of things, so you have to uncollapse each one of these things individually and show it to the participant. And as soon as they see it, they go, that makes sense. And no one's ever described it to me like that before. So in this experience itself, these distinctions are created: developmental trauma from moral injury from addiction, whether it's drugs, alcohol, food, porn, shopping, OCD, codependent personality issues. And when you spread those things apart for people, they look and say, that's my life right there. That's exactly how I live my life. this happens because when people experience this kind of developmental trauma, the damage is in the subcortical region of the brain. So the last part of the brain is growing over top of the part where the damage is. That's why it's so hard for the medical practitioner to get at that level of trauma scientifically. They're aiming in the wrong spot. And there's a certain way to very quickly process and begin to heal from developmental trauma. And if this didn't work, I wouldn't be on this. I wouldn't have this conversation with you.
Right, right,
But this is 8 years every day in the laboratory, having direct experience on the court with people. A lot of people speak about this issue theoretically, and there's tons of white paper and research about this pandemic of suicide. But until you really understand what's going on for that person internally, you cannot help them help themselves.
right, right. So, I guess my big question is, and probably somebody is saying, well, and nothing against the organization, but if you guys crack the code, like, why isn't this like everywhere? Like, oh my God, these guys have figured it out. This needs to multiply, needs to be in every state, and needs to be.
Well,
We
I
need
can
to.
tell you why. I can tell you why. There's 15 derivatives of saw across the country.
Okay.
And each one of these derivatives has taken a piece of saw and gone out and said, we have a solution. They don't. They don't understand there's a migration of going from thought leadership to
Mhm.
platform to think tank. We have just signed for our second facility in the state of Ohio, where we are constructing the National Center of Excellence. With that, we will have online programming to reach the masses with this kind of a
Nice.
conversation that, of course, is time bound by the limits of what you and I can discuss in the time we have remaining.
Right. Right.
But we plan to release X amount of episodes at a time so people can kind of binge watch and have this experience. There are some very well-heeled organizations in the space that have borrowed from this evolving SAW curriculum that absolutely do not have enough relatable information based on direct experiences from their peers that make up that organization to help someone. And that's very, very dangerous. And we're an organization that's had 3 documentaries made about it. We have been in front of the leaders of the preeminent post 9/11 organizations. You would be shocked the fact that there are organizations that don't want a conversation like this to fledge. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. The reason is
Right.
they think
Right.
we're all fighting over the same dollar. We're not fighting over the same dollar. Saul's created its own market. We started out of the trunk of a car 8 years ago, and we are now regularly raising 7 figures a year so that we can do these non-traditional things. We've had schools of social work come in, Michigan State, The Ohio State. I've just been admitted to the University of Southern California's doctoral program in social work. So we're opening ourselves up to these institutions of higher learning. Um, when an organization like Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in 1935, it took about 10 or 15 years for that to proliferate and spread. And they obviously didn't have
Mhm.
the networks available that we do today. I
Right.
can tell
Right.
you that there are organizations that are out there in this space that have remnants of Saul, and they're not Saul because they're not going to have the kind of conversations that we will have with people at a very intimate level to move them in a direction of a recovery program that can actually help them integrate survival traits that are second and third order effects from complex PTS. They don't even know that they don't know that, but they've got
Right.
a lot of money. They can get you together for a few days, get you out of your house, unisolate you, put you around other people where you're all sitting around talking about the same thing. You get some really good internal chemistry going. You get some real good shots of, endorphin in the brain, and then they send you home. And then they send you home, and you very quickly crash. And now it's worse. It's worse. It's almost worse for having gone and had that experience. That's a very, very irresponsible thing to do. One of the things we've done since day one is we do not open any doors that we don't have the resources to close. If you come to S.A.W and you are honest, open, and willing, you will absolutely walk out of the experience knowing exactly what is going on for you at both the clinical and the metaphysical level.
Sure.
We will shoot you straight if you shoot us straight. Now, I'm going to tell you, when I tell you that, Dean, what we see in this community at about 85 to 90% is significant sexual abuse in childhood.
Mm.
People who've been perpetrated against. And when that happens, and when somebody is compromised at the corporeal level as a child, what
Right.
that does to their psyche in the subcortical region of the brain is devastating. And there's not a lot of different ways to resolve and heal from that, because the people that are setting up these other interventions have not experienced that or have not healed from that. So that's a very long answer to a question like, why
No.
haven't you revealed this? It's
No.
like, look, Alcoholics Anonymous ends in the word anonymous for a reason. We are
Right.
dealing with a term of art known as the adult child. We have spent the last 8 years with people. Let me tell you what, the guy who's third in the door to kill bin Laden does not want to tell you he's an adult child. It's the same
Right.
thing as him
Right.
saying, it's the same thing as an alcoholic in the 30s not wanting to walk in to the CEO of an established firm on Wall Street and say, Bill, I'm an alcoholic, because of the moral stigma of these things that we have to come to terms with in this. If I be honest with myself and honest with you, I'm not going to get better. And here's the thing that our people start to figure out very quickly. It's not your fault if you were raped by your father at 7 years old, but the brain doesn't know the difference. Okay. That's not a novel reveal at all. It's not a novel reveal for someone to sit in the space with us and say, I had sex with my mother. I had sex with my sister. I had sex with my uncle. So if you want to talk about the secret sauce in our community is the overwhelming preponderance of people who have been sexually abused or sexually exploited or introduced to their sexuality at a very, very inappropriate age. They grow up, they want to become a superhero and save the world. They go off, they get the moral injury. There's a collapse into the complex PTS. Let's put an addiction on top of it. And, sometime later, do you hear what happened to Charlie? That's how the story plays out. Now, sometimes that's a little too direct for people, but I'm not if somebody says, would you rather make somebody uncomfortable or help them see why their life isn't working? I'm choosing the latter.
Right.
And that's after 23 years in the room of recovery. What you're going to find in other organizations is their leadership will not talk about or will not indulge their own recovery. That's why we have an epidemic, because the leaders of most of the VSOs are completely full of shit about their own inauthenticity and about their own struggles in life. And that is why there's a pandemic of suicide in this country, in the military, returning veteran community, and the first responder space.
I think you actually turned a page and unveiled something a little bit bigger than just the suicide pandemic, right? So you talk about the VSOs and other folks, but the leadership not focusing on their own recovery and all that. But when people that are helping other people don't do their own work, when you don't do the work yourself, you can't help other people, right? To the level that you need to. You got to do your own work, correct?
There's an old saying in AA, you can't transmit something you don't have.
Yep. 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 And it's a
And
big
it's and
one.
it's
And
really sad. It's really sad because the resources and the platforms are available.
mm,
Um, but everything Saul has done, we've been very, very lucky that, we have had to go out and raise, the funds. We were very lucky to have this second facility gifted to us by a prominent businessman here in Central Ohio. And it was his family's retreat. And we're in the midst of, we were lucky to secure the note to build the National Center of Excellence. But I'm going to be doing what you're doing on having this capacity to broadcast like this and to have
Nice.
people come on and share their experience, strength, and clarity
Beautiful.
about what the issue is. And look, there's nothing stopping me from going on Facebook Live and hitting
Yep.
a button and saying, "Okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to tell you what's wrong with you until you finally believe me." That's not how people get well. People only get well when what they're doing for them stops working. And if they're
Yep.
fortunate enough to find themselves in a circumstance to be open to hear, because the how of this is the shared honesty of mutual vulnerability, openly acknowledged. The last thing you want to do is walk into this experience and say, listen, I've been having an affair with a sibling for the last 20 years.
Right.
That's not a novel reveal. That's all. I have been involved with my father for the last 15 years. I have been doing things that I can't share anywhere else. You want to talk about the secret sauce? The secret sauce is we are a community that is completely full of shit when it comes to talking about what really happened to us and what we're really up to when no one's looking. And when you can come to that kind of honesty about who you are and what you're doing with your life, now you can heal, because there's a way to integrate those survival traits and have a shot at an authentic life, or you can just keep drifting and have a shitty life.
Right.
And it's, we have had people sit with us saying, you know what, nobody's ever talked to me like this. And you know what we say? And that's your problem, is you don't let anybody talk to you like this in your life, because you are a god of your own understanding. You are wreaking havoc in your own life, the people that care about you, and your children. And that's typically where the breakthrough occurs, is when people realize the transgeneral nature of developmental trauma. And do they want to be the one that finally puts the stake in the ground and say, all of this insanity stops with me?
Mm, yeah. Powerful. You were saying there was approximately 1,100 people that have come through the doors of SAW currently.
Yes.
Out of those 1,100, how many people have you? Well, I know I was going to say I'm thinking of the wording, and so as far as have there been any reports of anybody committing suicide after the fact, or has it been so profound for them that they have changed in some profound manner? I guess if that makes sense to you, trying to, out of the numbers aspect. And I know that's not what we're focusing on, but just to give folks, if they're listening to this, kind of an idea of the profound impact that SAW is making on
That's a
folks.
very fair question. Now, I will tell you, I'm aware of 4 suicides. I'm aware of, I can tell you the 3 of them were comorbid with alcoholism. I know of 2 overdoses. I know of 3 natural causes. Um, and I can say that out of 1,100 people that have been to SALT, now in recovery, most of the people coming here are comorbid with chemical or process
Right, right,
behavioral addiction. In recovery, if you just walk in off the streets, whether it's AA or NA, most 5% of those people the first time are going to achieve recovery. If they go to rehab, it's somewhere between 15 and 20%. I could say out of SAW, out of 1,100 people that have been to SAW, I would predict that somewhere between 300 to 400 of those people are living lives today not previously
right,
imaginable. Now,
right.
people would say, what about the other 600 or 700? They're just not in enough pain yet to
Mm,
do the necessary work that they were exposed to,
right.
because we have a very robust forever aftercare opportunity, whether it's the alumni community, whether it's private coaching, whether it's the ability to have peer-to-peer support in their cohort and beyond, with our introducing them to a variety of models out there in the community, most of which end in the word anonymous. Until that person is really ready and willing to surrender at their core of what
Mhm.
the issue is and strip themselves of any title, no matter how bitchin' it was in their prior
Yep,
life,
yep.
they're not going to get well. But there are hundreds of people in this community today whose lives are unrecognizable because they did the work. They meditate daily, they work on their recovery. It's the number one priority in their life. And they realize that if they really and truly want to help the people closest to them, the best thing they can do is focus on their own healing. We have hundreds of stories like that. And we have catastrophic stories of people who walked out of here knowing exactly what they needed to do a day at a time. And for
Right.
a host of reasons, a day at a time are not doing that. We've had people come back. Many people have come back for what we call a hot wash or a review. And sometimes that's what it takes, for them to finally get it.
Sure.
It doesn't take a long time to heal. It just takes a certain degree of honesty and willingness with oneself.
You said it a couple times now, Jake, and you said change typically doesn't happen until people are in enough pain to want to change. Why do you feel, or what have you learned? Why do folks have to get in a level of a pain? Why do they, not saying, earlier on and saying, I just want to change? Why do they have to get into, you were saying that they, typically folks that come to SA have been through all of these different, I'll call them modalities or different centers, and maybe SA is
We
one
call
of
it
their,
we call it being on tour. They've been on tour.
okay.
That
So,
we ask them, how many of these programs have you been to? Well, there's a reason why. You have to imagine that when you're stuck in life, imagine that you're swinging on a trapeze with your right hand, and you're swinging back and you're swinging forth, and we're saying to you, listen, you got to let go of that trapeze. They can't see the other trapeze. No, I'm not letting go of this trapeze. Listen, I promise you, if you let go of that trapeze in your right hand, that there will be one there for you to grab onto with your left hand. We do some things at Saul that are analogous to this. It's not that they don't want to let go of the trapeze, and it's not that they don't want to grab the next one. It's the space in between that
mm,
terrifies them. It's the letting go, and it's the uncertainty of that moment. We are able to, in every instance, prompt a quantum mystical, also known as an aha moment at Saul. It's the reason why we have we don't need to advertise, because people leave and they tell their brothers, they tell their sisters, dude, you got to go through this
right,
experience. It's amazing. The problem is, and we share this up front, those aha moments are temporary and they rise to the level of relief. The cure is always painful. That's why people don't get well, because there's this belief system, because the people that come to us are fear-based by nature, by development. The
mm,
ACEs scores demonstrate this. Their ability to trust another human being is limited by their ability to trust their mother and father or their family of origin. So they have to find something bigger than self, some higher power, that they can learn to trust more so than they did mom and dad. That's the
right,
first big hurdle to get over, because mom and dad let them down their entire life and probably still are. They're in these enmeshed, enabled, codependent relationships with people, and they don't know how to get unstuck. And the only way to get unstuck sometimes is like, hey, player, you got to let go of that trapeze. And they have to have this moment of death, this leap of faith to cross that threshold into this idea.
mm,
And that's the critical moment. The jumping off point, Dean, is the critical moment. Now, are they going to pivot and head back down this path that we've just walked them back? It's a complete, we have to walk things back at Saul. We're walking back to the starting point, and we have 4.5 days to get you there. And we always do.
mm,
In 8 years, we've never had a dissatisfied customer. Now, people that are upset a couple of years later, if you ask them honestly, they'll say, well, yeah, I went home and I stopped meditating. I didn't go to recovery. I didn't go back to my therapist. Most people in our experience, though, within 6 months to a year, have titrated off all their meds. And most are on anywhere from 6 to 2 dozen. Now, that in itself, as much as Saul has been filmed, as much as Saul has been written about, the people you want to be asking that question to is the Secretary of the VA. Why are you only paying for one cohort a year at SAL? Why are
Right.
you not sending your social workers and your clinicians to embed with when there's an open invitation for you to study this modality that costs about $3,000 a person? Like, why wouldn't you scale this thing?
Right.
Those questions are above my pay grade. What I know is that there are people alive in this world today living unrecognizable lives. And what my dad said to me when he tried to talk me out of this 8 years ago before he passed away, he said to me, listen, if you just save one, it's going to be worth it. And
Right.
we've gone way beyond that. We have opened up an area analogous to what Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith opened up to in 1935. And I think history in the next few years will demonstrate that the SAW model, by and large, for the people struggling with complex PTS, is an absolute necessary experience along the way. You have to have this secular spiritual initiation to
Right.
get somebody, because you have to get past the existential crisis, the neophobia. That's the effect of the trauma in that part of the brain, is people are terrified of anything new, and the ontological insecurity, which is the fear-based ongoing internal dialogue that's happening for people. We were very close to this breakthrough as a society in the late 80s and early 90s. Prozac hit the market, and that's the direction everybody went in. And you see the drift as a result of the serotonin crisis, the opioid crisis, is that if I can just pop a pill and get through the day, that just seems like a simpler way to go.
Right.
Now we're at a critical mass where that no longer is serving people. There is a different kind of listening with what's going on in the world today, that people are more open to this blending of the Western medical approach versus the Eastern philosophies, and they're blending into this Western Zen. Everybody's meditating, everybody's doing yoga, but what people are not doing is going in those rooms of recovery and really getting honest about who they really are. And until
Mm.
that happens, this pandemic will continue. We think that we exist as a template that people can come in and seek to replicate in places beyond the SAL organization, and they just don't do it the same way we do. And we know this from the feedback from people that have been to Odyssey, that have been to Warrior Path, that have been to Warrior's Ascent, that have been to Warrior Heart, that have been to, I can go on and on and on, and I can list off all these experiences, because a lot of those people at some point worked at SAL or worked with SAL or embedded with SAL. But you got to stick around long enough. You can't leave before the miracle happens. And if you leave here half baked with half the message, you're going to hurt a lot of people.
Right.
And that's arrogance, and that's hubris. And, I can say that after 23 years in the rooms of recovery, because I had really good spiritual advisors that just didn't take any shit from me. They just
Right.
didn't put up with my shit. They held my feet to the fire because
Right.
they knew that their own recovery was tied to my own. Until my recovery is tied to yours, I don't have a shot. And you have to get yours first. There's some real spiritual principles at work here in this work.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Tell us a little bit in a snapshot what Heroes Village is all about.
Warrior Village,
Or sorry, Warriors Village. Sorry.
we have Warrior Village in Newark, and we have a second facility coming online. My business development person here is going to kill me because we're in some supposed quiet phase. I don't know why I signed for the property a few weeks ago, and I think we should be telling the world. Warrior Village is just like any other retreat center where you can come to and have this experience in a set and setting with containment to go through this initiatory process. And, you're kind of disconnected from the world.
Sure.
You've given up your phone, and you're going to go through a very intense 4.5 day experience with people who have already been through this experience, that are going to help you get down to the unborn grief that's stored in your body, that's causing you to do a whole bunch of crazy shit, um, that's not serving you in any way in your
Sure.
life. And you're going to have some really, really honest conversations, and we get into that from the opening moment. There's no time wasted. We know you before you get here. We know your name. You've gone through an enrollment process. you have been typically referred here. You have had an opportunity to learn our patented meditation technique, and you show up ready to go for the next 99 hours. And you are going to articulate through a variety of ceremonies and rituals and biopsychosocial educational experiences. And you're going to feel like somebody has reached down your throat, grabbed you by the butthole, and snapped that over the top of your head. And in 4.5 days, you're going to be very, very clear about every aspect of your life and why you are the way you are, and why what's going on for you internally is what's going on for internally. It's probably going
Right.
to be the most honest, revealing, vulnerable experience of your life. The great news is everybody around you in that space has gone through it before you have,
Hmm.
and is going to share as honestly and as transparently as you are willing to with us.
Nice.
We're going to
Nice.
tell you exactly all of our stuff too.
Nice. If somebody is out there, Jake, somebody listening to this right now, watching this video, if they want to get a hold of you or, reach out to Save a Warrior, how did they do that?
At saveawarrior.org. And if somebody is out there, Dean, to be responsible and dutiful, if you're drinking too much, if you're drugging too much, if you're looking at too much porn, if you can't stop paying for sex, if you're gambling away all your money, if you're eating too much, if you're finding yourself in codependent relationships, there are a host of 12-step programs in your community, maybe right down the street from where you live, that are waiting for you to walk in those rooms. It is the most terrifying thing. The scariest thing I ever did as an FBI agent was walk into a 12-step room in November of 1997. The people on the other side of that door were welcoming and inviting, and are the most incredible people that we will ever meet. For whatever reason, this community struggles crossing those thresholds, going into those rooms that have been around for 85 years, no charge, the most tried and true, well-grounded, commonsensical healing experience. People don't wait to come to Saw to start to get well. We are known as the last house on the block, and we're not the end all be all, because all we're going to do is prepare you when you leave here to go in those rooms. Why? Because they're everywhere. They're effective. And what you learn in those rooms is you will not get well until you're willing to give away whatever you learn in those rooms for fun and for free.
Mm.
That's really the message that we have for folks. And the people who leave Saw and really thrive are the ones that go home and get into AA, NA, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, what have you, Al Anon, Codependence Anonymous. When people give themselves permission to have that kind of humility, the only thing that changes about their lives is everything. That's what
Beautiful.
they can do. That's what they can do before they come to Saw. Because the people that come to Saw with 12-step experience do very, very well in their time with us, because they're honest, open, and they're willing. When I stopped being full of shit about being full of shit, my life started to change. I could actually contribute something positive to another person's life rather than just looking for ways to take from them. You know, most of my
Right.
life, I was selfish, self-seeking, self-centered in the extreme. And it wasn't until I was pounded down into a pile of talc that I could finally look to the people around me and say, will you please help me? I was finally ready to receive help.
Hmm.
It is not what people think. The reason they want to kill themselves is not the reason they want to kill themselves. It never is, in my experience. And I had been dealing with suicide since a 12-year-old neighbor boy killed himself when I was 13. That was 41 years ago. I had been fascinated with this idea. I experienced my own dozen years of suicidality from about 1997 until about 2011. You know, there's about 15 years. I thought about killing myself every day. And when I finally found the right meditation practice and the right recovery experience, the suicidal thoughts went away
Mm.
completely. And that's what we're in the business of doing. The worst thing I can think of is someone killing themselves and especially if they have children, because those children will believe for the rest of their time on earth that they were responsible for their parents' suicide.
Mm. Very well said. Well, and always certainly a challenge, but just a really fascinating discussion about this. I find the whole thing just very fascinating. But obviously, you guys know this is. Thank you for doing what you do, Jake, and you and your team and everybody there. Just obviously changing lives, and just continue doing what you're doing. But and we'll make sure we have the website up on the screen, and the way that if somebody needs to get a hold of you, they certainly can. Um, but thank you so much, Jake, for being on the Red, White, and You show.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.